Hello everyone and welcome back to the 3T Path channel and welcome back to our Uddhava-gita course. Now we started in the last class a new chapter, chapter 12 of the 11th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And in this chapter what's going on is that Krishna just in the last chapter, Krishna gave Uddhava a summary of spiritual life. He started with the basics and he progressed to the point of talking about bhakti. But then at the very end, he introduced the topic of sanga, of the power of being in touch with people who are practicing this devotional connection to him. And then in this chapter, he starts focusing on that then. And we read and we went through this very long, this big paragraph. It's verses 1 and 2 in the last class. But we're going to just go through it quickly again and then do the purport of it and then move on. Now, this is our 49th class of the Uddhava-gita course. So there are 48 other classes waiting for you, and you can watch them by becoming a member of this channel, and you can do that in the description of this video. There's the explanation where you become a member of the channel, and then you can access the entire course and make sure to watch this. It's such a beautiful, important text, the Uddhava-gita. It's not much spoken. People talk a lot about the Bhagavad-gita, of course, but the Uddhava-gita is a real jewel. Krishna's last instructions, just 7 days before he left the planet. Okay, so let's quickly read verses 1 and 2 again. Again, we're in the 11th canto, 12th chapter. And this is verses 1 and 2. So Krishna said like this: the Supreme Personality of Godhead said, "My dear Uddhava, by associating with my pure devotees, one can destroy one's attachment for all objects of material sense gratification. Such purifying association brings me under the control of my devotee." And Krishna likes using this thing, brings me under the control of my devotee, like so much love. There's so much love involved that he surrenders control. So it's a poetic expression, right? You control God. It's like, not that we want to try to control God, but it's in that sense of just deep love. So we can control me. And then he compares it. He says, look, so there's this. This is so powerful, one can control me by it. It's such a powerful technique associating with my devotees. So then he compares it with other famous Vedic techniques. He says, one may perform the Ashtanga yoga system, right? Described by Patanjali. One may do that. One may engage in philosophical analysis of the elements of material nature. What's that? That's called Sankhya. So he says, look, you can do yoga, you can do Sankhya, you can practice non-violence, ahimsa, and other ordinary principles of piety. So you can be very dharmic. So he's talking about yoga, he's talking about Sankhya, he's talking about Dharma. He says you can, now more ritualistic, you can chant the Vedas. You can perform penances. You can take to the renounced order of life. So you can take sannyas, you can do tapas, you can do sannyas. You can execute sacrificial performances. So you do rituals, yagyas, different kinds of ritualistic yagyas. All these very famous practices glorified throughout the religious, holy scriptures in the Vedic canon. Or you dig wells, plant trees, and perform other public welfare activities. Give in charity, carry out severe vows, worship the demigods, chant confidential mantras, visit holy places, or accept major and minor disciplinary injunctions. So you can do the yamas and niyamas, you can do pilgrimage, you can do all these things, worship the demigods. All these things are glorified in holy scriptures all over the world. But he says, all those things, but even by performing such activities, one does not bring me under his control. So it's very poetic, exaggerated way of Krishna saying, look, this is so much more powerful than anything else you can come up with. Everything else you've heard of, all the other religious recommendations, all that doesn't compare to associate with my devotees. Now we're going to read the purport, but just briefly, like why, right? Why would that be so? Obviously, because the whole point of satsanga, this being in contact with, this makes you assimilate the mentality. And since bhakti is the highest state, Krishna says in Bhagavad-gita, of all the yogis, the ones in bhakti, the bhakti yogi is the highest. So bhakti is the highest state, it's love, it's all about love. Ultimately, it's all about love. So this, and all the religious traditions will like the theistic traditions will explain this. It's all about love. So you want to get to the point of pure love, this pure love of God, prema, Krishna prema. So that's where it's at. Everything else helps you to become detached from material nature, to get rid of bad karma, to clear the mind, to settle the mind. All these other practices help you, like they prepare the soil, as it were. A good explanation is preparing the soil. So you have a horrible piece of ground, right? It's full of trash, it's just a mess, and it's got glass and stones, and it's just like, so that's a horrible piece of land. So then what do? You have to, I want to do a beautiful garden here. So you have to prepare the soil. So you have to remove all that bad stuff. Are you going to remove the trash out, the rusty bicycle, and you're removing all this garbage out, the plastic bags, and so you're moving all this, you're preparing this. This is all the processes of dharma and meditation. All these things are preparing the soil. So you're removing all the bad stuff. And then you're getting the ground, then you start adding the right things. So then the ground's soil is beautiful now. But it's just soil. You haven't planted anything yet. So all these other, religious, semi-spiritual practices are there to prepare the soil. But what is the seed we're going to plant? What is the flower? What is the fruit we want? We want the fruit of love of God. That's what you want. So everything else is preparing the soil. And you prepare the soil so that you can have prema. So that you can have this loving relationship, bhakti. That's what it's all for. And it makes sense. As we understand, all that was just preparation so that I can be in bhakti. You understand? So that's why these things, they're, they won't do as much as the bhakti, because that's the objective. And if you're there with a person who's already has the bhakti plant going, the bhakti creeper, then that person will teach you how to clear the soil as well. But that person will teach you to clear the soil, to prepare the soil for the purpose of bhakti. While other paths, people are just talking about clearing the soil. They're just happy that they cleared the soil. Their mind is calm. They're free from sinful activities. But that's not enough. And that's why associating with my devotees, Krishna says, is so powerful. So let's read the purport here. The commentary of Srila Jiva Goswami on these two verses can be summarized as follows. So Jiva Goswami is a very important, great intellectual spiritual master of our lineage from the Middle Ages. One may serve the devotees of the Lord by assisting them or by having their personal association. And of course, as I mentioned in the last class, sorry to interrupt Jiva Goswami here, but it's very important to understand that the world has dramatically changed in the last decade or so, about 2 decades. So now, when we talk about associating satsanga, this here is satsanga. This is very powerful satsanga. There is no difference between this, what we're doing here, and you're going to some temple and seeing the person physically in front of you. There is no difference, because this is a transmission of mind, of consciousness. What we're doing here is sharing ideas, thoughts, vibrations, the mind, the consciousness, and this is being carried through via digital media. So this is association as well, as is, WhatsApp group, as is watching classes on an online course. These are all exactly, even I would dare say, better than physical association. I would dare say that, because I've had decades of the association, the physical and the digital. I know the two very well. And with the physical, because it gets weird, because you hear a lesson here, but then like what the rest of the day, then, things get strange, and you see like, some bad ideas come up, and that's why you see sometimes, abuse, financial abuse, you see sexual abuse, you see weird things come up. If it's just with other practitioners and then they're like on a lower level, and so you're physically approximation with people on a lower level, and then they want to lord it over you, and then there's politics, all the temples have their own inner politics, all the religious institutions have lots of politics going on, so it gets weird. But with this, you don't get any of that. It's just the pure stuff. It's just the good stuff, the pure best thing of association. So I would dare say it's even actually better. Association with a pure devotee is sufficient for self-realization, Jiva Goswami is explaining, because one can learn everything about spiritual advancement from such devotees. With perfect knowledge, one can achieve all that one desires. For the process of devotional service immediately brings the blessings of the personality of Godhead. Pure devotional service is transcendental to the modes of nature, and therefore it appears mysterious to the souls conditioned by those modes. In the previous chapter, Lord Krishna stated, Havishagno yajet tamam. One may worship me in fire by offering oblations of ghee. Also in verse 38 of the previous chapter, it was mentioned that one should construct parks, recreational places, orchards, vegetable gardens, and so on. And these serve to attract people to the temples of Krishna, where they may directly engage in chanting the holy names of the Lord. Such construction projects may be understood as purtam, or public welfare activities. Although Lord Krishna mentions in these two verses that association with his pure devotees is far more powerful than processes such as yoga, philosophical speculations, sacrifices, and public welfare activities, these secondary activities also please Lord Krishna, but to a lesser extent. Specifically, they please the Lord when performed by devotees rather than by ordinary materialistic persons. Therefore, the comparative term yata, according to proportion, is used. In other words, such practices as sacrifice, austerity, and philosophical study may help one become fit for rendering devotional service. And when such activities are performed by devotees aspiring for advancement, then they become somewhat pleasing to the Lord. In other words, of course, we have primary activities and secondary, tertiary, and so on. So, devotion, of course, we can also do all these nice things. I like to do charity. I like to help out, and you send money to Oxfam, to Doctors Without Borders, help in some calamity somewhere, an earthquake here and a flood there. And of course you do that. So you do these charitable things and you try to help your society, your community. You do them as an offering to Krishna. So these things are nice as well. This is our community dharma. We don't just lock ourselves up, and just chant the holy names and let the world go to hell. We're here. It's part of our dharma to participate and help the world in many ways. And of course, we're also going to be studying. We're studying right now. So we study, of course, and we do yoga, and we, in the sense of like meditation and controlling your senses, and you can even do breathing. So we can do all these other practices mentioned by Krishna in order to keep purifying, preparing our soil ever more, so we can have a beautiful bhakti lot bead. We could plant the creeper of bhakti. So we want to make sure the soil is prepared as well. So it's not that we don't do those things completely. By performing Vedic, ritualistic, and purificatory processes, one is gradually elevated to the platform of bhakti, whereupon one is able to directly worship the Absolute Truth. One Vedic injunction states, the result awarded for fasting continuously for 1 month on 6 different occasions can easily be achieved simply by accepting a handful of rice offered to Lord Vishnu. So I love this this saying. This is a very interesting comment. So think about fasting. So fasting is like tapas. This is like it's a it's very difficult penance, right? Fasting. Can you imagine fasting for a whole month? Very hard, very hard. Almost like you're almost dying. So very tough, extreme penance to fast for a month. And then they say, look, if you do that 6 times, so it's not always just 1 month, you did it 6 times. Very hard. I couldn't do it. Anyway, so very hard. So that is as good as having just a handful of prasad, of Krishna prasad rice, which that I have a lot of. So I have, so I regularly have, handfuls of prasad rice offered to Krishna. So devotion is so much more powerful, because that was like, you got your food, you offer food. That was one of the T's of the 3T path of this channel, of what I'm offering to you. And one of the T's of the 3 T's is transcendental food. It's prasad. So you offer your food in love, devotion, as Krishna asks us to do in Bhagavad-gita. So you offer your love, with love, your food before eating. So then you're eating prasad, you're eating food offered to Lord Krishna. And that is more powerful spiritually than 6 months of fasting without thinking of God. That's what they're saying, which makes sense, right? Because one is totally transcendental. The other one is a material penance, which will have some scars, will leave some vrittis, but ultimately may still leave you completely in the material world with no clue of transcendence. This facility is especially offered in the Kali Yuga. So then it continues to explain, especially in Kali Yuga, this is like those. Nevertheless, regulated fasting on Ekadashi is not an impediment to spiritual advancement. So we also practice Ekadashi. That's the vow whereby on the 11th day of the moon of each cycle, the moon has 2 cycles, when it's growing, when it's diminishing. And so on the 11th day of each of these, so it's about every, twice every 28 days, on the 11th day of the moon cycle, of each of the moon cycles, you fast. So there's different rules for Ekadashi, and I follow the very simple version of Ekadashi that Swami Prabhupada left for us, which is just to avoid grains and legumes. Just grains, so like you don't eat peas and soy, and don't eat rice and pasta and tofu. So it's very easy practice. You just, there's many other things you can eat. So you can eat vegetables, you can eat nuts, you can eat, if you're not vegan yet, you can eat dairy products or vegan. So it's very easy to do. So you can do Ekadashi as well. It's not an impediment to spiritual advance. Rather, it is a perpetual aspect of devotional service and can be considered an auxiliary principle supporting the main principle of worshiping Lord Krishna and his devotees. Because such secondary principles help one become fit for executing the primary process of devotional service, they're also greatly beneficial. So this language is important. Primary process, secondary, tertiary. There's levels of, and they're all. So you don't throw away even like the lower levels of practice, like giving charity to needy people. It's not necessary. It's not the primary process, but it's certainly purifying as well. And especially if you do it as an offering to Lord Krishna. So you do those things as well. These all lead up to bhakti. Bhakti doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's a whole system. But it's important to understand the hierarchy of the system. Therefore, such secondary principles are widely mentioned throughout Vedic literatures. It may be concluded that such secondary principles are essential for advancement in Krishna consciousness, and therefore one should never give up the principle of vrata, vows, the execution of prescribed vows. In the previous chapter, Srila Sridhar Swami mentioned that the words agyayevam gunam doshan indicate that a devotee should select Vedic principles that do not conflict with his service to the Lord. Many of the elaborate Vedic ceremonies and complicated procedures for fasting, demigod worship, and yoga practice cause great disturbance to the supreme process of Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu. In other words, hearing and chanting about the Lord, which is at the topmost, most primary practice of bhakti. It always goes back to Shravanam, Kirtanam. Right now, I am Kirtanam and you're Shravanam. So right now, I am chanting, glorifying, doing the Kirtan, I'm speaking, and you are Shravanam. You are hearing. So very important. Hearing, discussing topics related to Krishna, his activities, other avatars, spirituality, the process of becoming enlightened, of becoming free from it. All these topics are greatly important. And so Shravanam Kirtan, again, also when we say, this was back in the old days when there wasn't written stuff. So really old days. So, of course, Shravanam Kirtan also means reading. Reading is also Shravanam these days, right? When you're reading, you're absorbing. So absorbing information, sharing information. This is at the topmost. This is at the very pinnacle of bhakti. So you have to see these practices which won't get in the way of your Shravanam and Kirtanam. And therefore are rejected by Vaishnavas. However, the process is helpful to devotional service should be accepted. The example can be given of Maharaj Yudhishthira, who was instructed by the dying Bhishma Deva. In Srimad Bhagavatam 1.9.27, Bhishma instructs King Yudhishthira in Dana Dharma, or public acts of charity, Raja Dharma, or the duties of a king, Moksha Dharma, or duties for salvation, Stri Dharma, or duties for women, and ultimately Bhagavata Dharma, or pure devotional service to the Lord. Bhishma did not limit his discussion to Bhagavat Dharma because Lord Krishna gave Maharaj Yudhishthira the devotional service of acting as a king. And to execute his service, Yudhishthira Maharaj required extensive knowledge of civic affairs. However, one who is not rendering such prescribed devotional service in society should not unnecessarily involve himself or herself in the material world, even by practice of Vedic rituals. Nothing should distract him or her from the ultimate goal of satisfying Lord Krishna. So that's the point. You live your life, you follow your dharmas. And it's like maybe for your dharma, you might be an accountant. So you have to have all these accounting dharmas. You have to learn all these rules and laws. And that's important because that's how you're serving Krishna. So that's all very spiritual now. And maybe you're a programmer and you're learning this language and that language and this new system. And that's important for your devotional service because you're offering your programming abilities to Krishna. When you go to work, you're doing it as a loving offering to Krishna, and so on. So whatever is your dharma, your purpose, then we're doing everything for Krishna, so that becomes part of it. Becomes part of your spiritual practice as well. Very important topic. The principle of not giving up prescribed vows may be further illustrated by the example of Maharaj Ambarisha. Very important example. Listen up. In the 9th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, we find that although Maharaj Ambarisha performed elaborate Vedic sacrifices, his goal was always the satisfaction of the Lord. The citizens in his kingdom did not desire to go to heaven because they were always hearing about the glories of Vaikuntha. Ambarisha Maharaj, along with his queen, observed the vow of Ekadashi and Dwadashi for 1 year. Since Ambarisha Maharaj is considered to be a great jewel among Vaishnavas, and since his behavior was always exemplary, it is definitely concluded that such vows as fasting on Ekadashi are imperative for Vaishnavas. It is further stated in Vedic literature, if due to negligence a Vaishnav does not fast on Ekadashi, then his worship of Lord Vishnu is useless and he will go to hell. Very hard language you find in scriptures about Ekadashi. The members of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness fast from grains and beans on Ekadashi, and this vow should always be observed by all of its members. So, there's this practice of Ekadashi to be followed. If one falsely thinks that one may obtain the association of Lord Krishna merely by great austerities, brilliant studies in Sanskrit literature, magnanimous acts of charity, etc., one's Krishna consciousness will be distorted and weakened. So the point is, if you think that you'll get there by doing indirect means, it won't work. Unless you have the specific focus with Krishna and you're having this interaction with those like-minded devotees of Krishna, learning from devotees of Krishna, reading texts such as this dedicated to preaching to highest Bhagavad Dharma, you won't get it. Other things won't do the trick. Obviously, right? I mean, it's kind of obvious if you think about it. If you don't do the main thing, it's like, how can I learn to play golf if all day I'm studying like the aerodynamics of a golf ball, or if I'm practicing tennis to get my swing, or if I'm going to the gym but then I'm never actually doing I won't ever play golf. So you have to go directly to the main thing. Of course, just the secondary things won't take you there. They'll help once you get to there, but you have to get to there, at some point. Very good. One should remember the example of Lord Chaitanya, who practiced Krishna consciousness by constantly hearing and chanting about Lord Krishna. Shravanam Kirtan. Again, this is the primary practice described in the Bhagavad Purana, glorified in Uddhava-gita, exemplified by great acharyas, and throughout the ages, this Shravanam Kirtan is at the highest top. But the Lord clearly explains here that such activities can never become central. But the Lord clearly explains here that such activities can never become central in the practice of Bhakti Yoga. They must remain in an auxiliary relationship to the supreme process of sanga, or association with pure devotees who hear and chant the glories of the Lord. Srila Madhvacharya has quoted from Vedic literatures that if one offends the Lord's devotees and does not learn to associate with them, Lord Vishnu personally places barriers in the path of such a person so that he may not enter into the Lord's company. Okay, so that was a beautiful long purport. Thank you for your patience. So I left it for this class to read it, but it's a very important theme. So we just stayed in these first two verses of this chapter again, and next class we'll go on to the next verse. So very important theme of the importance of this, what you're doing right now, and that's why I take this moment also to ask you to share this stuff, share this course, invite more people. There are as far as I'm aware, there are no Uddhava-gita courses online, and certainly not going this deep, and certainly not so easily accessible. So please share this, let people know, look, this is an amazing text, Uddhava-gita, amazing text, not so famous, but so important, and now everybody can have access to it and have such an important practice, in the highest practice described by Krishna. They can all engage in it if you share it with them. So thank you very much for your time and patience. Have the rest of your day with lots of peace and lots of love.